Hiya, I'm Bridgitte. I'm one of the regional directors in the clinical team across Witherslack Group, and I'm across the Midlands. But we've got 7 of us in total across our different regions. So I'm going to hand over to Carole to introduce herself as well.
Yeah, my name's Carole Hudson. I'm a regional clinical director and I'm based in the Northeast. By background, I'm a therapist and I've worked with children and young people over 27 years now, predominantly supporting children and young people who have been engaging in self-harming behaviours and supporting the families that look after them as well. We just want to acknowledge it's a very sensitive topic, so we would please ask you to try and keep yourself safe throughout the presentation. If you need a break, please have a break. And if you need any kind of support afterwards, we recommend, using your usual support systems. We do have numbers which Bridgitte is going to share at the end. So we have links, we have telephone numbers, and we'll try to make sure that this is as safe presentation as possible. We would also say that if you are worried about your child, always seek medical advice, and we will try and kind of give you some support ideas and strategies. But in the immediate situation that you're worried about your child, please contact 111, A&E or your GP. Again, we'll give out those numbers during the presentation. So naturally and understandably, as a parent and carer, we imagine you have many thoughts and feelings when you become aware of your child's self-harm, self-injury, or having dealt with it maybe over a period of time. Would you like to do the next slide, Bridgitte, please? Mm-hmm. What we thought of is words which might capture the feelings, thoughts, and emotions that you might have. The first one we thought about was the word triggered. Now, that could be maybe as parents and carers, you've got lived experience yourself. It may be upsetting for you to hear that your child has self-harmed or has self-injured. Again, it can trigger emotions overwhelming for yourself, and Bridgitte is going to later on in the presentation show how maybe we can take care of ourselves to be able to deal with what's presented to us. And I guess even no matter how much support you may get as a parent and carer, you might feel quite alone in the situation. You might actually be alone and dealing with it on your own. And again, that will lead to frustrations, maybe frustrations with your child, frustrations with yourself or services if you don't feel anything's changing immediately or you're not sure what to do. You might have a really good understanding and be supportive of your child. But at times it still will be quite frightening for you to think about the future and what might be happening in terms of your child's emotional state. You might get angry. You might get angry at your child for self-harming. And one word that we wanted to put in there was the word rejected. As a parent and carer, sometimes it can feel quite rejecting. If your child's disclosed maybe to someone else and you have a phone call from school to say, just to let you know this has happened. And again, that might lead you to have all of the frustrated, angry feelings about why did they not just tell us, or why did I not know this? And there's reasons for that, and hopefully we'll be able to go through that in the presentation. Supportive, scared's a word. Absolutely, you're scared. You're scared in case your child really, really hurts themselves, and you're scared what people will think that about your child maybe self-harming. And again, that leads to all the stress for yourself and stress on the family. And again, I think it's a circle around that brain there with everything going through, it lead to the triggering again. So we just wanted to acknowledge that these are the range of thoughts, feelings, and it's totally understandable that this will happen. So I'm just going to hand over to Bridgitte.
Thanks, Carole. I think in line with everything that Carole's just said, some of the aims we wanted to make sure we covered today was to help people understand what self-harm is and what self-injury is, because we see them present in different ways in our children. We also need to think a little bit about who is most at risk of engaging in self-injury and self-harm, understanding the function underneath it, because actually so often our strategies end up being focused on the behaviour itself, when what we really need to understand is what's happening underneath and why that's going on for that young person and what need it's meeting and how we can look at meeting that in different ways. We're also going to give a bit of guidance about how to have those difficult conversations, how to turn towards something that's really quite uncomfortable and do that with a supportive, compassionate way, but also whilst looking after yourselves. And we're going to talk a bit about creating safety plans or saying safe plans that you can do with your children. Typically, it's something that we'll do with children in our services, but really mindful that there isn't always somebody available in every other service that can really provide that space for a child to explore how to keep safe. And it's brilliant to have parents involved in that, because actually so much of, what's going on for your child, you'll know much better than the professionals around them. And as I mentioned, it is really important about keeping yourselves emotionally safe throughout today, but also throughout the journey if you are working or looking after children, or your own children who are experiencing, engaging in self-injury and self-harm. And just linked to that, just in terms of my background as well, because I forgot to mention with all the all the issues of muting, is that I'm a psychologist by trade, and I've worked with children for several years now. And prior to moving into Witherslack Group as a psychologist, I had been working with children in inpatient camp services who had lots of very difficult experiences in the community trying to seek help. So I know how frustrating it can be trying to get your child help, and sometimes it feels like you can scream from the rooftops and no one's really hearing. So today our goal is to hopefully help you feel heard and validate your difficulties and your experiences, and hopefully leave you with some ideas about how you can offer some more practical support for your children. So we're going to start off, though, with looking at understanding what self-harm is and self-injury. So I'm going to hand back over to Carole to have a look at some of the terminology we might use during our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Bridgitte. So there's 3 terms that we use. And the first one is self-injury. So there are behaviours that cause injury where harm is not the actual intent. And we see this in our neurodivergent children and young people. And it may be that they would hurt themselves in various different ways. So banging their heads on surfaces, biting arms, hands, or pulling hair. And that, as we will go into the presentation, we'll discuss is ways of communicating a distress or a need, or a sensory communication that they may have. And that is self-injury where they're actually not intending to harm. We then have self-harm, which is intentional, causing a physical pain or harm to oneself. Now, that necessarily doesn't mean that that person wants to end their life. However, some quite significant self-harm that has occurred can cause end of life. And what we would call that is misadventure. So that is non-suicidal self-injury. Now, today the presentation is about self-harm, but we will just mention suicide and end of life in this section, and that is because sometimes it is intertwined. Now, the term suicide, ideation, and intent, you could have ideation which has fleeting thoughts to being completely preoccupied all the time. And the intent is there is a desire to end your own life. And the term suicide is the actual act of killing oneself intentionally. So if we move back to self-harm, the misadventure is potentially where someone has engaged with significant self-harm, and that is not necessarily the outcome that they wanted. And again, because we've mentioned suicide, we want people to be able to take care of themselves, and we will have all of the help and advice around that prepared in this presentation and can be sent to you. Thank you, Bridgitte. Next slide. So who engages in self-harm? We have young people who've experienced developmental trauma and multiple ACEs. And when we say ACEs, we refer to adverse childhood experiences. So young people who, in the next box, it'll be children, young people who are fostered, adopted, or come to live in children's residential homes. So with the Witherslack Group, we see a lot of young people who have come to live and learn with us who have experienced multiple instances of trauma. We've included in the next box the armed forces, prison, sheltered housing and hostels. And that's because we usually see quite a cohort of the first 2 boxes then going and residing into these areas. And when they transition into that, the self-harm still is there, or it can increase due to that transition and change. We've also included boarding schools, because there is a high incidences of children who live and reside in boarding schools who experience self-harm. And then we have the double whammy of young people who find it hard to verbally express themselves, but are also going through identity crises or challenges. So we have a double whammy there of quite high incidences in our young people who are experiencing identity. We also have young offenders, which is 65% female and 10% males. And what we find with our females is that the self-harm is quite prolific. So it can be multiple times, which shows the increase of, which is why there's the larger number in female. We also have young people who are dependent on substances, and that could be either to cope, be confident, mix with their peer groups, or to dull emotionally. And we will go into that later. We also have our neurodivergent children and young people who self-injure as a communication of need. Thanks, Bridgitte.
Okay, thanks, Caroline. So around our kind of neurodivergent and neurodivergent young people, there's a lot of different research out there that helps us to understand why we might see higher risk in that population. And sometimes we've got, there's a few different studies we can go through, but in particular, there's one that looks at the role of self-injury and how prevalent that might be. And parents reported around 14% of autistic children engaged in self-injury. Another study found around 24% engaged in self-harm. So thinking back to that kind of intent, some of it might well be more sensory seeking and stimulatory behaviour. Some of it is more about wanting to cause harm to self. We've also found in research that adolescents diagnosed with ADHD are again also at the risk of increased kind of self-injury and self-harm and suicidality as well. Now, there's lots of different reasons why that might happen. And I think obviously we need to remember that every single person is unique and different in their experiences. But we might see in this population of children who are autistic, we might see more painful life experiences, more trauma as well. And that could be around how systems have been supporting them, because having to navigate a neurotypical world when you are neurodivergent can be very difficult, and it can provide lots of difficult experiences that, end up leaving us with some adversity and trauma. We also tend to see that children who are autistic or neurodivergent tend to have a lot more barriers in accessing support and services, and that might be personal barriers around how easy it is to talk and to share and to ask for help, but also systemic barriers in terms of what is actually available to young people. We also see a lot of masking or camouflaging as well, of children trying to desperately fit into other people around them. And actually what ends up doing is making them feel really isolated and shut off from their peer group. But the masking experience and the kind of camouflaging stuff that we might see is exhausting. And spending all day trying desperately to suppress who you are is a really difficult experience and can create such internal conflict. We see potential kind of increased risk around children who really struggle to communicate their distress. So it may well be really difficult for us to really name what it is that we need to express. So we end up seeing people expressing how big their feelings might be more through how they're presenting and how they're behaving, rather than being able to actually communicate that through language. They may experience more difficulty kind of imagining the consequences of actions. They may react a bit more to the kind of the urges that they're experiencing, and it might be difficult for them to see beyond that urge and what might happen afterwards, or to recognize that might cause themselves harm. We also see sometimes children who are neurodivergent can experience a bit more difficulty around kind of problem solving or thinking flexibly, and that can be really distressing and really difficult in many situations. Again, we see some difficulties with something called interoception, which is our body's signals to our brain to tell us what we're feeling, and that's around our emotions, but also around our kind of day-to-day functioning. So some children who are neurodivergent might struggle to notice when they're feeling hungry or when they need the toilet, for example. All of those just kind of disconnection, I suppose, between brain and body can also make things feel very difficult and overwhelming. It's often only at the point where the emotion becomes really big that you can notice that's what they're experiencing. It also influences their pain thresholds as well. So if there is a bit of difficulty with the brain, the body sending signals to the brain, it doesn't necessarily know when it is in pain and when it is causing harm. So actually, we might have children who are engaging in behaviours that are causing them harm without really knowing that that's what's happening to their body. We also see them having to navigate really complex social situations, which can be really overwhelming and anxiety-provoking. And we know that anxiety and having to try and to cope with that feeling and that state of anxiety also increases the risk of self-injury towards ourselves. We also see increased social isolation, and in this population as well, we can see some of our young people experiencing comorbid conditions. So we might see increased rates of depression and anxiety, as I mentioned, and other things that might make it really difficult. So we can see, having worked in Camden and Witherslack, I can really see how other mental health issues can come into play because of all the other factors I've just listed as well. So we're really mindful of the fact that we want to make sure that we're supporting everybody who is struggling with these sorts of difficulties, and across our whole organisation, that's a really big kind of priority for us in the clinical teams. But obviously we know it's something that needs to be extended throughout our society to really understand how our whole system should be responding to our children. Okay, I'm going to pass back over to you, Carole.
Thank you. I want to take you into methods of self-harm and self-injury, and it may be that you're aware of some of these as well. So the first one, self-cutting. Now that young people can use any implement. There can be any depth of cut and any patterns. What I will say is that it's rarely seen on the face. So by the time we kind of find out it's going on, young people have been quite adept of covering themselves up. And again, we'll be talking about what signs to look out for. So self-poisoning as well. That's not just about ingestion of tablets or medication. We have young people who will swallow bubble bath, shampoo, bleach, anything that you can swallow you're not meant to, and that usually ends up with a trip to the hospital. That can also include batteries, especially those lithium batteries, with that release of that substance inside. We see young people who insert items, so it may be that they use spelks or pins, but actually leave them in the skin. That leads to further complications with infection, and that further complicates the actual method of self-harm. We have your neurodivergent children who will bite, bang heads, or hit the body off walls. We've also got high-risk offending behaviours, and that's included because some of our young people seek a cortisol hit. So it could be that element of danger, but there's also a risk to it. We see young people maybe climbing buildings that could fall through the roof, the window. There's some gang-related behaviours that can also be not recognised as self-harm. We've got self-asphyxiation. So we do have young people that might hold the breath, might put something over the face. And until we understand what that means for that young person, and we're going to talk about functions in a moment, that might be difficult for people around that young person to understand. And I'm aware of the time, so we have disordered eating. That there's two elements there. There's a self-harm element where young people will limit the food intake or maybe binge. But we've also got our neurodivergent children who may have like a sensory issue with food. And again, it's knowing your young person and knowing the difference and then being able to put that plan of support in place. We have substance abuse. Young people, as I mentioned earlier, might use substances to either feel or not to feel. And the one thing that we really wanted you to know was a method of harm which is called popular harm. And popular harm is whatever, how do I say it, fad that is going on at the moment. Is that the correct word, Bridgitte? And it is really essential that we watch out on social media. We try and look at what adolescents in particular or potentially encouraging each other to do and showcasing. An example that I can think of to mind is cigarette lighters, heating up the end of a cigarette lighter and burning arms. We had a fad of that. We also had a time where young people were pressing each other up against a wall on the chest to make them pass out. Well, that can be really, really dangerous, especially if it's near your throat. That might crush. So I can't really say at any one time, like at this moment, but it is well worth watching out on social media. Schools are quite good. I know in Witherslack group we're quite good at being able to pick this up, and it may be that we will send out some warnings to say, just be aware, this is the trend that is happening. Next slide, please, Bridgitte. So, signs of self-harm. As I said earlier, it is very rare to harm on the face, so sometimes it's difficult to spot that young people are actually cutting or hurting themselves. So things that would like you to kind of notice is checking to see if your child's fully covered around others, or they're wearing baggy clothes where they might not necessarily do that. Have they got unexplained injuries? And you probably would see them around the wrists, the forearms, the thighs, your chest. We notice with our young people who live with us, we'll know if there's a tissue with blood stains in the bin or on clothing. So it's quite good to have a look out for those signs. Sometimes it's hard to see that a young person's hair pulling, because they can be quite adept at tying it up or wearing caps. But if it starts to get quite significant, you're going to start seeing bald patches. Look out for signs of low self-esteem. If they become more withdrawn than usual, that's probably another signal. Avoiding situations, maybe where they have to change clothes, like swimming or PE, or out with the family, sitting in the garden. So sometimes you might hear your child express more feelings of failure, uselessness, hopelessness. That can lead to self-loathing, which ends up in a vicious cycle. May be signs of depression. They might be more tearful. They might have a lack of motivation or interest in things that they normally do. You're probably going to notice that they might have increased distress and a lot of emotional overwhelm. The other thing that we wanted you to be mindful of is, if you keep seeing broken things in the room, it may be that they're using that as an object to be able to cut, maybe. So it's always useful to just do a sweep of the room and just think that seems unusual, and why have they got that? It could be that they're using those as implements to harm with. Thank you, Bridgitte. So we're going to go, we've done methods, we've done signs, and now we're going to go into what the potential function is. So there's many different reasons why a child or young person would engage in self-harm. It is absolutely usually a way of communicating a need. Unfortunately, the methods that those young people might use have an unintended consequence, and that is where we see the self-harm. And unfortunately, in some cases, self-harm that needs medical attention. And that may be because they find it difficult to communicate what they're thinking or feeling. And that could be for a variety of reasons. And if we think about a young person's developing brain, they have this magical thinking that if something feels right for them, that's what they're going to use, that's what they're going to do. And unfortunately, what we see is not healthy. They might associate that it's worked at some time to try and support themselves. And they'll also do it just to hope and show the adults around them to come and do something. So we really have to look at what need is the function of that harm meeting. So some of the functions is for a young person to gain a sense of control over their own body and the world. It's either a communication or distress, or a relief or release. We often hear young people say, I've cut myself because it just makes us feel calm. Where I mentioned before about a young person's self-loathing and low self-worth, sometimes they will engage in self-harm because it's almost like a punishment to themselves, and a validation that they aren't really a worthwhile person. So that's something that we would absolutely have to look for. Are they using self-harm as a way of punishing themselves and having them believe that they're actually just not a value person, a worthwhile person. We sometimes see that where bullying's concerned. And another function, what we also find is shifting emotional pain into physical pain. For a lot of people, and this is the feedback that we have, this is not just me saying it, to deal with physical pain is a lot easier to deal with the emotional pain and everything that is around what might be causing that emotional pain. As well as taking pain away, it might be that you're feeling numb. It might be that the young person just has no joy. There's just no emotion there. They're detached. So it may be that they will harm to then see if they can feel something, see if they can just have anything that they can connect with. So then we have the sensory stimulation. When there's that overwhelm, as Bridgitte was talking about, they might find ways of trying to regulate, managing sensitivity to sound, light, texture, and touch. And a lot of that is an immediate distress, and it's a go-to response. It's hard for them to think the way through what is happening for them. So you'll see that immediate, maybe head banging or biting, rocking, hair pulling. And it may be that a function is that they actually don't feel like they've got nowhere else to turn to. And it may be that they don't want to tell you as a parent carer that they don't want maybe to feel disappointed in them, or they find it hard to tell you for many reasons. So attempt to express immediate physical pain or discomfort. So we've already kind of just covered that as well. Anything else you want to add there, Bridgitte? Have I covered that?
No, I think you covered everything really well. I think the thing to remember is we also need to consider the fact that actually not every incident of self-harm might be meeting the same function. So it can be really difficult because we might see it, at times children might be using it to communicate, but other times it might be more about trying to get a sense of relief. Other times it might be more because they're feeling lots of shame and they want to punish themselves. So it can change. Not every child gets stuck in the same kind of function. So it means it does require us to be quite creative and quite responsive to what's happening in terms of meeting that need in a different way. Because I think these are all amazing strategies children have learned to use to survive and to cope with their feelings, but they obviously have that harm component to themselves. We don't want that to happen. So we want to be able to replace that with a new strategy. And later on, we'll talk about how to meet those functions in different ways.
Okay, thank you. The next slide. So I like this visual. We'll call it the self-harm cycle, and where a young person starts to feel emotional suffering or anything that is triggering to them that might cause overwhelm, we see that move into emotional overload. At that point, the body will reach a panic state. The brain will think something dangerous is happening because the body is starting to produce all of these, as we say, cortisol, everything else in there. And it might be your breathing quickens up, so your brain's thinking what's going on, and everything just leads to panic, anxiety, and overwhelm. And then that will lead on to whatever method of self-harm that young person feels will soothe them or help them at that time. And actually, Bridgitte, it's not, you've just made us think, it wouldn't be just cutting, it might be cutting and whatever else that they decide to use at that time or have the availability to do. And I think once that's over and done with for that young person, it then leads into feelings of guilt and shame. And what I want to stress is shame's one of the hardest emotions to work with, and it makes it really difficult to connect with your young person, whether you're a parent or a carer or a professional. If a young person's in a state of shame, it is a really hard thing to kind of break. So I think if you're a young person in a state of shame, then that leads to more emotional suffering, and then round the wheel we go. So it is a bit of a cycle, and I guess what we're hoping to do is try and break it somewhere on there.
And I think the key way that we can break it is to really work with the post-incident sort of shame after it's happened. So if we can help children to feel safe, we then get a chance to stop that kind of continuing on then to the emotional sort of suffering and overload.
Absolutely.
Key way we do that is supporting ourselves to be able to respond differently, perhaps, to what's going on for that young person and that child. So what you can do is know what you need to look after yourself throughout the whole process of trying to work through this with your children. You need to be able to look at how we can create those safety plans to help them stay safe and support them to communicate their distress in different ways. We always include this as part of looking after ourselves, and for you looking after yourselves as well, because we can't help our young people and children unless we're in a place where we can be safe. So it is very much about looking after yourselves throughout that process. One strategy that you can use, because this is very difficult conversations to have, and we'll talk a bit about how to use the language to have the conversation soon, is a stop method. And it's very simple, just taking a pause. So if your child has engaged in self-harm, rather than reacting with the understandable fear and potentially anger and frustration and distress that you're feeling, taking a moment to take a breath, pause, and just breathe in and out for a moment and just feel your muscles soften and relax, and just kind of find the way back to feeling calm as much as possible, whilst also showing how much you care. We need to then observe and pay attention to the stuff that's coming up for us, and then move towards that young person, that child, and explore what's happening for them from a much more calm state. A way that we can start to do this a bit more is to build up some kit bags of things. I know that we've talked about this in other presentations in the past, but it is such an amazing resource to have available to you, because we can't tell ourselves to be calm. It doesn't work. So we need to have things that make us feel calm. So our body has to feel calm rather than our brain making our body feel calm. So it might be through safe smells, through particular pictures or images or music and playlists that make us feel relaxed, soothing items to touch, things that are grounding, anything that's quite strong in flavour as well, or a nice warm cup of tea, something that just soothes us so that we can then soothe the children and young people. Some things to avoid when talking to your child about what's happened. We don't want to force them to talk about it or force them to change what they're doing, because actually we thought, Caroline just mentioned about the functions, and some of it is about control. And if we start trying to force them to change, we then take more control away from them in the situation, and it can end up making things much more difficult for them. We want to avoid making them feel like it's something to be kept secret or something wrong to talk about, because we want them to be able to come to us and tell us what's going on for them. We need to avoid assuming that every episode is the same reason. As I mentioned earlier, we might have very different functions to different behaviours that we see in different situations. And it's really hard sometimes we need to avoid getting angry. And I know that the anger can often come out of fear. It's usually what's really underneath anger, especially in these sorts of situations. But like I say, do that stop method, take a breath, and just make sure you're coming at it from a point of view that allows the child to feel safe talking to you about it. We need to avoid doing anything that can threaten to take their control away, as I mentioned a minute ago, and try to avoid ignoring injuries or overly focusing on them, because one end of the end of the spectrum or the other is still really tricky. We need to avoid talking about it with them. We need to avoid talking about it. So we need to talk about it with them. Sorry, I'm at a site today. I've got a few young people knocking on the door. So we need to not avoid talking about it. And it can be very difficult to turn towards it and actually have that conversation. But the more we avoid it, the bigger it can get, and the more overwhelming it can feel, and the more alone our children can be in their difficulties. We need to avoid labelling it as attention seeking, because a lot of what children are doing is attempting to communicate and to seek care. But unfortunately, the phrase attention seeking has lots of negative connotations, and a lot of people are told they're attention seeking when they're engaging in self-injury. Avoid pretending it doesn't affect you. Show them that it affects you and that you care. Avoid jumping to conclusions about why it might be happening or what might be driving it. And avoid assuming that what they need from you. Let them guide you, let them lead you and tell you what they need. I think the key thing as well is to avoid being offended that they haven't told you. As Caroline mentioned, it can be really difficult when we get a phone call from somebody else telling us that our child or young person has done something. But it might well be that it was just in that moment that I was the right person to tell, and they're fearful of what we might do as responding to them, because they know how much we care. Instead, what we'd recommend doing is doing lots of kind of compassionate focused conversations. So validate their feelings and whatever's going on for them, and have that empathy and understanding about what they're doing. Relate to them as a whole person, not just as their self-harm. So try to look beyond the self-harm when we're trying to validate what they're going through. Acknowledge the courage it might take for them to even start the conversation or to respond to you in that conversation, and remind them how wonderful they are and how strong they are for even starting to explore that with you. Reassure them that you're there for them and you're not going to judge them. Give your time and really pay attention. Turn phones off and just, protect that time so they know that it's for them in that moment, and let them lead you. Ask them how they want to be supported. although it's very difficult to do, resist the urge to fix it. I know that a lot of us can have this kind of relationship with others where we're trying to ring to let off steam after a difficult day. And as soon as someone starts to fix it, it can feel even more frustrating. So it's similar in this situation. It's not about making it better right now. It's just about listening and hearing and validating what they're going through. We will need to think about kind of medical attention potentially if they have hurt themselves. So there will be something practical that has to come into play. But in that moment, we want to make sure they feel safe. Be curious about what might be causing the distress for them. Help them to return in and explore, because it may well be they don't know themselves. Try different forms of communication. So children can really struggle just to sit there and tell you what's going on, as I'm sure you probably already have experienced. So have a think about beyond that. What else could you do? Could it be written? Could it be in letters? Could it be through text? Could it be through some form that allows it to feel more comfortable and easier for them to communicate with you? As I mentioned before, check in with yourself throughout the conversation. Take a breath whenever you need it. Use whatever item you might have with you that makes you feel safe so that you can stay calm. Because as soon as you start to respond to the emotions, children are like sponges, and they will feel that and they will replicate what you're feeling as well. Share with consideration. So I'm not saying we should sit there and tell other children if we've had those experiences, but it might well be a really good opportunity to share that you've experienced anxiety or difficulties and it's been frustrating building relationships, and just it links in with that kind of validating what might be going on for them. Offer lots of ongoing reassurance so they know that after that conversation it's not just going to stop and you're not going to stop asking about it, but that's part of then the sort of setting next steps. So what are you going to do about it now? Who are you going to speak to? Who might we have to refer them to in terms of making sure they've got the support they need? And linked in with that, I think Caroline kind of mentioned it earlier, we need to have a think about I guess discouraging some of that harmful online content, because I can't tell you how many times TikTok has come up in conversations with me and children when I've been working through what they've been doing to themselves. Okay, and how is Caroline?
Thank you. So one method that we use at Witherslack group is to use the PACE model. It's a bit of a busy slide, so I will break it down in the next one, but we found it to be an invaluable tool when engaging young people. Being able to, who find it difficult to express themselves, but then making sure that they're comfortable in the adult company, which allows them the space to then try and diffuse the situation. So PACE breaks down to playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And what we try to say is when faced with a really overwhelming situation, or you're trying to have that conversation with your child or young person, we try to be light in our interactions. So I don't mean like go on the computer or do board games. The playfulness is saying, right, come on, I can see what's happening. Shall we go for a walk? Shall we have a cup of hot chocolate? It's just trying to cause a break in the intensity of what's happening for that young person. What we're saying is we accept our young person's needs and emotions. I mean, we don't accept the behaviour, but what we do is we're acknowledging and accepting that we see that you are in distress, that you are trying to communicate something. Right, come on, we'll go and try and do something about it. And as Bridgitte just said in our last slide, we love curiosity. We love being curious. We want to know where this behaviour's come. And we do something called wonderings. We do lots of wonderings. So instead of using the why have you done this? What is that about? Wait, that might elicit shame. We try to go, I'm wondering what's going on for you there. I'm wondering when every Tuesday you seem to get distressed. I'm wondering if. So it generally does work because it takes away from a why question, which can sound like an accusation. I guess, and when we're doing the full PACE, it can look quite empathic to a young person, and it can feel that they are being heard. It's about finding that connection where the young person feels safe and they feel comfortable, and it starts to diffuse. When it started to, no, it's fine. Next slide, Bridgitte. When it started to diffuse, we try to use a questioning technique called OARS, and that is open questions, which can explore concerns, Again, a pace open question could be something like, I see you getting upset as we're nearing Christmas. Is there anything about Christmas that may be upsetting for you? So I'm thinking in terms of maybe that child's and the family have had a bereavement and it's the first anniversary. So we're noticing and curious, and rather than saying, you've self-harmed, why? It's about noticing what's going on for the child, and hopefully that might result in the reason for the function of the harm. Anything that a child tells you, yeah, affirm, thank you. It's really brave of you to tell us. I feel really proud that I'm the person you've told. Thank you. And you use your pace to say, right, what are we going to do about it? Reflective listening is just literally reflecting back so that your young person completely has known that you've understood what they've said. And you're not talking them from your own point of view. You're talking to your young person, sorry, from what they're telling you. And then do little summaries just to make sure that we've got it exactly right, what's been said to us. And again, it's a way for a young person to connect with us so that they know we've heard what they've said.
So I guess just to kind of summarize all the stuff we've just gone through, the key thing is we need to keep them regulated, because we can't have these sorts of conversations if they're still in heightened and distressed states. So in those conversations, notice if you need something, take a moment to stay calm, come back to that compassion, soften what you're experiencing, and validate their emotions. Hold all those questions in mind that Caroline's just suggested, and use that kind of playful approach, and just make sure you're checking in with yourself. This is the upside down kind of way of looking at kind of regulating children, because it's what's key for me is that unless children are in a regulated state where they can relate to you, we can't get to the place where we can reason and reflect. And it can be a very tricky thing. So don't worry if you don't always get it right in having those conversations, because we've always got the opportunity to repair. Now I'll just quickly go through a staying safe stuff for you as well. Okay. Go for it, Caroline.
Okay. That's me, isn't it? Yep. So I guess when we've looked at the methods, the signals, the functions, and when we feel like we've got your child or young person in a place where we can attempt to do some exploration of what it is that will help them, we create something called a stay safe plan. Now, these plans can be as creative as your child or young person wishes to do. They can be pictures, symbols, visual images, and we're going to show you some, and we're going to give you a couple of examples. But what we kind of need to know to go in this stay safe plan, which is a kind of contract between you and your child about what they need and what they expect from you, and what you will expect your child to do as well, because you're in this together. So we need to know what the risk is. We need to know, curious questioning, well, how will I know when you are struggling? What can you signal to me that I need to know that I've got to act on? Now, that would go on the Stay Safe plan. And just an example before we get on to the next slide, it could be that you use colour-coded cards. Your child could leave the red colour-coded card where you've agreed that shows they need you to do something. And again, you'll have agreed that in your kind of stay safe contract plan with them. So we need to know what are the triggers, the signs, indicators that's struggling. We also want to have in that plan, what are their coping skills? What do we know that works for that young person? What do we know sensory-wise helps your child? And then you are kind of agreeing with them. You'll have those items around and you'll support with that use. Always make sure you find out, is there a go-to person your child can talk to? And include any numbers that they can contact if you're not around in your plan. Look for risks in the environment. And I know young people have said, right, if I'm going to start to struggle, I need you just to take the mirrors out of my bedroom. And that's just an example, because I may end up smashing that and using that to harm. So again, you've agreed it won't cause dysregulation because you've agreed to do that. Again, things that make them happy and remind them of hope. We love to hear if our young people still have joy and hope. And we want them to that in that plan, we want a reminder of what that might look like. So if they like horses, it could be, yes, We will still go at the weekend and go and feed that horse that's in the field. And it just shows that they're still willing to engage in everyday life and connect with people. So you can make your plan as creative as possible. Try and include your child, but you can do them without them if they don't want one, because you can start one and they might then get involved.
Yeah.
I think the next slide, Bridgitte, we've got some examples. What we tend to do is pick a topic the young person really engages in. And what you'll see is pictures where young people have identified what helps and what doesn't help. So I had a young person who was interested in wrestling, and their Stay Safe plan was a wrestling ring. And the person who did the breaks with the water and the towels, they were named as the go-to person. They said that when you showed a towel in the ring, it meant they needed help. Now, you don't just need to do it on paper. We turned this into a real thing. So they actually had a wrestling ring and it would stay in the bedroom. And the signal for help and support would be the colour cards. You would leave a red card in the wrestling ring. And we would know that that would signal we were allowed. He was ready for us to go and say, right, what's going on? I'm curious again, wondering why you've left the red card in the wrestling ring. What do we need to do? What's going on? Bridgitte, you've got an example of Vampire Diaries, haven't you?
Yeah, yes. So yeah, I had to watch many episodes of Vampire Diaries to make some safety plans with a child before, a 12-year-old girl. And we just had pictures of different characters that represented her different emotions. So when we had a particular character and she'd put it on her front of her bedroom door, that would tell us that she was really struggling. And other characters would tell us that she's starting to struggle or she's doing really well. So we could then respond accordingly. It's about tapping into their interests to get them involved in these conversations without it just being sat there facing each other, having a conversation about it, because it's just so difficult to tolerate people. So actually getting them creative, getting them drawing, getting them to write raps. I've had that before, different raps and different playlists of music. I've had different lights being shown to tell them if they're feeling unsafe or safe in their bedroom. So it's all about just, meeting the child's needs and getting any way that help them to communicate when they need some more support.
Yeah, and some young people put, hang them on the bedroom wall,
Yeah.
or give them to a trusted person. But once you have that, and you don't necessarily have to do it all at once. It can be reviewed and over a period of time. But once that's there, what we do advise is that you do both work with it, because if we've agreed to do something, then we don't do it, it can cause further dysregulation.
Yeah.
But when everyone's working to a plan, it actually does usually work quite successfully. Now, I'm aware of the time,
Yes.
and I'm aware that you're going to be getting these presentations. So, questions to explore with your child. I'll not go through all of them, but there's further examples of what you might be able to start asking in a curious and wondering way with your O's and your P's, and try and getting that in the plan. And obviously communicate in the family as well, so that everyone's on board. But definitely want to hope we find out what makes me feel frightened, unhappy, unsafe. What does that look like? We're trying to get young people to get in touch with the bodies and the feelings. So we really want to know what they notice about how they're feeling before they harm. And we love the one at the end, hopes and dreams and things I love and like right now. It's
Focus on the
really
good stuff.
important, to get those in the plans as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is just a very quick quote to just show how important it is to work with what's underneath rather than the behaviour itself. So focusing on only the behaviour without addressing what's underneath is like trying to put out the fire by aiming the hose at the smoke instead of the flames. It's always something I'm holding in mind, because I think so much of our response is about the smoke and not the flames. If we meet a different way to meet the need, then the water ends up kind of putting the flames out rather than the smoke as well. There's loads of examples here, and again, we'll send that out as part. Hopefully, we'll be able to kind of give you a little pack of some of the things that we've covered today, rather than going through it in lots of details. But if you kind of work out with your child that it's about them trying to communicate, like we've said, find creative ways to change their light bulbs or use some different cards, they can tell you when they're not okay. If it's about release, explore lots of different coping strategies and soothing strategies where they can rip up paper or pop bubble wrap and things that give them that same sense of release. If it is about self-punishment, we need to work on helping them show their worth and how wonderful they are, and help them to build up that sense of self-compassion and understanding. If it's about shifting emotional pain, we've used ice cubes and things because it can cause a little bit of discomfort, but it isn't going to hurt. So there's loads of strategies online you can find as well. If it's about moving from being numb to feeling something, then we might use different grounding techniques. And if it's sensory stimulation, create a sensory box. So it's about meeting that addressing the flames, not the smoke. There's a list here of some emergency actions. It's always really important to consider emergency action if your child has hurt themselves and it could be significant in terms of harm. So there are some numbers, obviously, go straight into A&E or ring 999 or 111, depending on the level of emergency as well. And also there's Childline and Samaritans, and they have urgent response kind of phone lines where your child or yourself can ask for help and ask for guidance too. Speak to your GP and find out your local kind of CAMHS crisis number as well. There's tons of information online on some of these websites, and there's some amazing apps as well that can really help. But in particular, Calm Harm is one I've known a lot of adolescents mostly use, and they've really benefited from using that as a way of trying to help themselves in moments of significant urges. So sorry we've run over just a little bit here, but we've now finished. So we've kind of got some space, hopefully, for some questions. If we haven't, then feel free to ask the questions and we'll be able to try and answer them a different way instead.
Okay, thank you both for a brilliant presentation. We've had a lot of questions submitted, so we'll try to answer as many as we can. Yes. Bridgitte, would you be able to stop screen sharing for the Q&A just so we can see you both?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Oh, has it worked?
Yeah. No, that's worked. Okay.
So my screen was still on it, so I couldn't see your eyes as well.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's fine. Okay, our first question is, my daughter has eczema and suffers with anxiety. And when she's feeling anxious, her scratching increases and she almost looks angry when she's scratching. Is this a form of self-harm?
It could be. It could be something that she's getting, I guess, in terms of some feedback and response about. So it could be that when she's overwhelmed, perhaps, as we mentioned earlier, one of the functions can be shifting emotional distress into physical pain. It might be that she's responding to that and it's allowing her to feel something a bit different than the overwhelm in those moments. And if you are seeing that kind of emotive reaction and doing it, I've seen that happen with young people, and they're just getting a response. They may not even realize that that's what the response is, and they might not even realize that that's what they're doing. But it could potentially be, if it is something that she's getting back, and it could potentially be around, shifting from feeling overwhelmed to feeling that kind of physical discomfort is much more comfortable to feel, really, isn't it, than the anxiety and the overwhelm and the what ifs and the catastrophizing that you might feel when you're overwhelmed. You want to add, Caroline?
Yeah, absolutely. It's signaling distress about the eczema, isn't it? And it's I guess it's probably about finding another method for her to do than focusing on that, because then that lead to further an injury, won't it? Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for answering that one. Our next question is, I've approached my local NHS services to support my daughter as she started to pluck out her own hair due to a previous trauma incident. But these services are unwilling to support until she does something to physically hurt herself. I'm concerned about the hair plucking escalating to self-harm. Do you have any advice?
It is frustrating, isn't it, Caroline? We've had this conversation so many times where, unfortunately, having worked in inpatient CAMHS as well, I've worked with so many children who have had to escalate and escalate and escalate until someone realises how much they need help. And we should be able to get in there sooner, and it can be very difficult to get. The systems aren't always built for that because of resources. So it is frustrating. And sometimes maybe we need to get a bit creative with finding ways to help her. So with some of the links on the websites that we've kind of given might be a good place to start. There are some forums as well where you can seek support. But unfortunately, that's a story we hear quite often, isn't it?
And I guess it's making a head start yourself as well, because she is communicating her distress with the hair pulling, and you've alluded to a traumatic event, and I guess it's helping your child understand that at this present moment in time, she's with you, she's safe. That event, I don't know about it, but that event is not happening. I'm acknowledging that, you're using hair pulling to communicate a distress or to regulate, and try and look at what else we can do. It's probably good just to keep a little diary of when that might be happening. For some of our young people, I'm thinking of one young person in particular, would particularly hair pull before school came back in September. So we realised it was quite regulated during the holidays, but then we'd get distressed before, and then the hair would come out. So, keep a diary, have a little look, and try
Yeah.
and encourage her to do something else. But as Bridgitte says, we've put some helplines and things.
Yeah, be curious about it, don't you? And start to think about those sort of staying safe plans almost, and sit down with her and have a conversation about what she might need in those moments instead.
Yes.
It is frustrating because I know we have so many people that are crying out for help, and actually there's just very little in the way of response and services. But there's a role you can absolutely play in helping her to feel safe, so that hopefully we don't necessarily kind of continue to escalate for her as well. But we are sorry it's so difficult.
Oh, thank you both for answering that one. Our next question is, how can I help my child whose friend is self-harming and her parents and school do not know? Her friend has said this in confidence and trusted her. Do you have any advice?
Well, it's better to tell, isn't it? I
Mm.
guess. I mean, I would tell your child what a good friend he must be
Yes.
for that child to be able to talk to him. It's a
Yeah.
big responsibility and a big pressure for that child to take on. So
Yeah.
amazing that he's got you as a parent, he's been able to share that with. And then I think it's probably working with your child to say, this is a really good that you've spoke to us. It's really brave of your friend, but we do have to do something about it.
Yes.
And I guess for that other child to be able to have the support, it's probably approaching the school.
Yeah.
Do you agree, Bridgitte? I think.
Yeah, I think we quite often see that happen, don't we? Because I think friends are so much safer in many ways because we always worry. Like, I know a lot of children can really worry about how their parents might respond if they were to tell them they were engaging in self-harm or self-injury. So I think there is a bit of a fear, unfortunately, a fear of letting people down. I think we see quite that, being one of the biggest barriers. So yeah, we do see children approach their friends instead. But it absolutely is a difficult thing for the friend to have to experience. But there is a conversation about how important it is to keep people safe.
And he may worry about his friend falling out with him, but in the long run, it will benefit his friend. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you both. Our next question is, what is the difference between self-harm and self-injury? My child makes flippant comments about self-harm. How serious should I take these comments?
Okay. Do you want me to go for it or you go for it?
I'll let you go, Bridgitte. I was just mulling
Yeah.
that over there. Yeah.
So self-injury and self-harm, as mentioned earlier, the main difference is intent. So we might engage in things that are self-injurious instead, without the intent of wanting it to cause us self-harm, but it could be through kind of regulating ourselves through stimulatory behaviours or sensory seeking. In contrast, self-harm tends to have that kind of typical intent, like I want to cause myself harm, and that's where we'll sort of see more of that coming into play. And what was the second part of that question, Jodie?
Should they take it seriously, was it?
Yes, I do think we hear children make those flippant comments as a way of trying to say, by the way, I'm having these thoughts. And they might say it in quite a kind of passing way or a bit of a more passive aggressive potentially, or in a joke format, or even through the kind of classic, oh, my friend's thinking about this. So we don't always, it's a hard thing to name and a hard thing to label and to step towards and talk about, that we might see children do it in kind of more sort of flippant ways as a way of going, do you know what, by the way, I'm thinking about this.
And it's using that pace, isn't it? That, right, I'm hearing you say this a few times now. What is this? Do you want to know more about it? Are you wanting? Is someone needing support about it? Do I need to help you with something? So it's almost calling it out, really, isn't it? But in a curious pace way.
Absolutely.
Oh, that was great. Thank you. Our next question is, my daughter enjoys playing video games that may be considered dark, but she feels this transfers and releases some of her feelings. Do you have any advice on this, or should it be avoided?
Oh,
okay.
interesting.
We're seeing that a lot in young people, aren't we? Playing some games that are definitely not always suitable for their age, but it's a significant kind of, I guess, not concern, but it's something that we're seeing everywhere. But it's interesting that she sees it as a way of releasing. I think she's obviously trying to find a way, isn't she, of releasing her experience and kind of, I guess, also communicating it, because she's using that as a way to tell you what's going on. I think it's very difficult because regulating children's access to games, as I'm sure everybody knows, is almost impossible sometimes. But maybe, again, it's kind of about thinking about how else she can release those emotions, how else she can get that sense of kind of expressing them and communicating them and releasing them without it necessarily being things that could be difficult for her to watch. But it might depend a bit on her age and the appropriateness of the game itself. But yeah, kids have all sorts of interests.
I guess it becomes really difficult if it gets to the point where that's the only way she can communicate as whatever is going on for her. And I think when it gets to that point, then I kind of would be worried. But as you say, Bridgitte, I think, trying to bring in other ways where we could replicate that in a real life sense rather than an online sense would be. But it's good to keep an eye on it. And it's, again, it's that affirmation, you know about it as a parent, so you've got that good relationship there already, that connection. So it literally is keeping an eye on it and seeing which way it goes.
And fantastic that she's told you that's what it's about. I think that's amazing. Like, I don't think every child I've worked with has had that ability to communicate to that level already. So amazing that she feels safe enough to say to you that's what she's using it for. So also kind of praise that, I suppose, in terms of you knowing that that's what's going on for her.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. We have time for one more question, and our last question is: my 7-year-old picks at his skin and both fingernails and toenails. We've tried to put other things in place, like rubbing his fingers, but it hasn't worked. We talk through things and how they can't heal, etc. Do you have any advice or alternative techniques, please?
Right. Yeah, I've go for it, Caroline. I've got
no, it's okay, you go. I was just thinking the word anxiety came to me head there when I heard that question. So he's got a default kind of scab pick reaction to maybe things that might be a little bit unsettling for him. It's trying to find something else that replicates that, like poppers, sensory stuff.
You can get these little pick pads, can't you? Have you ever seen the pick pads? Because I've got a 6-year-old in one of my schools, a school I'm at today actually, who has a similar difficulty. And we got him some pick pads. So they're like little kind of, I guess, rubber that have got loads of different beads in them, so you can pick the beads out. So if it's about replacing that physical sensation of pulling something out, that might be quite helpful. It's been quite effective for him in different situations, but it is very much usually something I see in anxiety. So actually maybe what you might want to work on is, rather than replacing the kind of behaviour, I suppose, by meeting that need with the picking the pad, that might be a useful thing to use. But what's underneath that? How else can we make him feel safe and to soothe the anxiety? And I think you'll find if you can kind of target the anxiety underneath, the distress that he might be feeling, we might start to see a reduction in that as it works anyway. But yeah, the pick pads are quite good for replacing that.
And that, do that, and also look at the core reason, the function of what it might be. Again, like keep a little diary, look to see if there's certain days or events that might increase the scab picking or the finger picking, and then environmentally that you could put a further plan in place to try and help reduce anything that's causing anxiety.
Yeah,